Hello everyone, my name is Madam Mythos, and I just want to welcome you to my channel with my first ever video where I will be talking about my favorite books. I will be mostly focusing on mythology in this one, but in the next video I will talk about more contemporary things that don't only focus on mythology. Without further ado, let's get into it. So, to start off, I collected some of my favorite books that are either based on mythology or classics in the mythology genre. I think I'll start off with more contemporary novels before we go into the classical, just because I think these will be more accessible for the beginner if you want to just be touching your toes into mythology without going into it so deeply. So I will get started with some of my favorites. And if you are on Book Talk, or if you are on the internet, or Bookstagram, or Booktube, whatever, you have definitely seen this novel. It is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, or Madeline Miller. I went into this book not expecting much. I will be honest, this was for a class. I was in mythology in college. It was mythology and ancient art, I believe, and the teacher recommended this book, and I was skeptical. I thought, I don't think they'll capture Achilles in the way that I think he should be captured as, but honestly, I was wrong. I was totally wrong. This book blew me away within, I think, I might have been on chapter 3 or chapter 4 where I was like, oh no, this is definitely worth it. I think I literally sat down. We only had to read, 50 pages a day or 100 pages a day, whatever the assignment was. I finished it in 2 days. I sat down, and I probably would have finished it in the first day, except it was college and I had other things to do. But I don't know, I sat down, could not stop reading this book. I had other stuff to be doing, but I said, I just can't put it down. So the Song of Achilles talks about Achilles, obviously, but the main storyteller is actually Patroclus, which, if you don't know, Patroclus was, in some iterations, Achilles' cousin. In some iterations, it was Achilles' companion, which back then in ancient Greece, usually young warriors would have a companion, and this person would always be with them, kind of as they would polish their armor, they'd keep them company, they would maybe cook for them, or take care of things which a warrior would be too busy taking care of. So Achilles was the one who was the fighter, and he was the greatest of the Greeks, which is what they keep mentioning in this book. And Patroclus is fine with that. He knows that Achilles deserves this grandeur and this praise, so he is fine with standing in Achilles' shadow. He does not mind. And as I said before, in some iterations, Achilles and Patroclus are just friends. History says they're just friends, but in this one, it's very much a romantic and deep relationship that they share. They really do love each other, and I don't know, for me, I was just blown away with how beautiful this relationship was. They just complemented each other so well, whereas Achilles was the brawn and the strength and the worthy of praise. Patroclus was more the brains, where he was like, let's think about this, let's talk about this. And whenever Achilles, as it said in the Iliad, Achilles' rage was indescribable, and Patroclus was the one to actually calm him down and be like, this isn't you, oh my god, look into my eyes, Achilles, this isn't you. And obviously, I don't know if this is a spoiler, the book came out 4,000 years ago, so spoiler alert, Patroclus is killed while wearing Achilles' armor because Achilles refuses to fight because of a slight made by Agamemnon, and he's just like, I will not fight for you, Agamemnon. You made your bed, now lie in it. Basically, if you lose this war, it's not my fault. And so Patroclus sees all his men dying and sees all his friends injured, and all the people are begging Achilles to fight just because they know that without Achilles they cannot win. And Patroclus is like, I will do it. Achilles gives him the armor with the caveat that he will not go near Hector. Do not go near Hector, because Hector will kill him. And he knows that once Hector dies, then Achilles will die. But it's more that he knows that he will not be able to live knowing that the killer of Patroclus is still running around and still living his life. He knows that he will just be blinded by rage and he will not be able to rest until he gets revenge on Patroclus's death. And the reason why he knows that he will die after Hector is because of a prophecy that his mother told him when he was young. Thetis, the goddess, she is a very powerful goddess, but I believe her father was a Titan, so she's not really an Olympian. She stays in the water and she just kind of lives her life as a very powerful goddess. She's friends with the Olympians. Like, she talks to them multiple times. In fact, at one point she like goes to Hephaestus and is like, hey, you owe me a favor. Can you make my little boy some really nice armor? Thanks, great. And she also goes to Zeus and supplicates to him, saying to, I believe, keep her son alive. I can't remember. I read this, it's been a while since I read this book. But going off about Thetis, she does not approve of Achilles and Patroclus's relationship. And I remember in class, a lot of people were saying it was because they were in a gay relationship, which I don't agree with really at all, just because this was in Greek society. I'm gonna be so totally real. In Greek society, it was common for an older man to have a younger apprentice, which their job was to teach them all about life as a man, and that included sexuality. I'm just saying that did go on, so I don't think it was that. And she's like, I don't care. She says at one point, like, I don't really care about Patroclus. The only problem I have with him is that he is mortal. He has nothing great about him. Yeah, he's smart and compassionate, but what will that do in history? That won't make him known. He won't be famous. He won't be revered or talked about in stories. So she's just like, if you're gonna be with my son, I want you to be building him up, not tearing him down. So that's why she doesn't really approve of their relationship, and she's just kind of like always telling Achilles, why don't you just leave him? Like, he's not doing anything for you. And Achilles is steadfast and stands up to his mother a lot and goes, no, sorry, I'm gonna stick with my boy here because he's been with me since day one and you left me as a baby, so whatever. So going off of that, of course we get to the end of the novel where Patroclus, killed by Hector, Achilles in a rage goes out, kills Hector himself, totally decimates his body in a way that even the gods are like, that's a lot, please don't do that. Which of course, like, he doesn't listen because it's Achilles and he thinks, like, he has nothing left to live for. He doesn't care anymore. And at the end, they're buried. And there is just this one line that, of course, everyone talks about. And I'll read it for you here. Oh, gosh. This is actually the last line in the book, so if you don't want to hear this, skip ahead. I'll put a timestamp. But it says, in the darkness, two shadows, reaching through the hopeless, heavy dusk. Their hands meet, and light spills in a flood like 100 golden urns pouring out of the sun. And of course, that is Patroclus and Achilles meeting in the afterlife, and I just find that so beautiful and so comforting, knowing that even though they have such a short time together on life, they will have eternity together where nothing is holding them back. Achilles does not have to fight anymore. Patroclus and him are free to just love and have peace. And that it's just comforting to me, and this will always be a comfort book. I've actually read this recently, a couple months ago. I just picked it up and read it again, and like the first time, I was just captivated and really, really in love with the characters all over again. So not only is this a great book, it has great reread value, and I probably will be picking it up again maybe next year whenever I have time. Obviously, the next course of action is you think of Madeline Miller and you think of Cersei. So of course, if we're talking about Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, we also have to talk about Kirke or Cersei, whichever pronunciation you use. Kirke is actually the more close with the original Greek, because if you didn't know, Greek does not have the C sound making a S sound. They actually only used like a K, like a hard K where they go K. So anytime you see a C in a Greek name, usually it's pronounced with the hard K, where it's like Kirke. I'll be saying Cersei for the rest, just for clarity. And my friend recommended me this book, which I was going to read it at some point, but she really pushed me to read it faster. And interestingly, she read this first and then Song of Achilles, and she thought this one was better than this one, whereas I read Song of Achilles first and then picked up Cersei, and honestly, I preferred Song of Achilles, which everyone has their own opinions. They're all valid. I just what happened with me. I have only read Cersei once, and I will be reading it again eventually. Again, like Song of Achilles, I think I read this in maybe less than a week, maybe like 4 days or something. And honestly, I really loved her character, but I think there are more interesting witches in Greek mythology. Cersei is a witch. She is a sorceress. Her grandfather is the sun god Helios, and then her father is another kind of sun god, Aetus, I think. And of course, if we're talking about Cersei, there is the connection with the Odyssey and Odysseus and Telemachus and Penelope, which I'll be talking about later. Still gave this, I think, 5 stars. I did like it. I did really enjoy it. I just will say I like Song of Achilles more, and I believe that there are more interesting witches or sorceresses in Greek mythology, but that is no blame on the author at all. Like, this book is great. I will not say this book is not fantastic, but in my opinion, I just think there are more interesting women in Greek mythology that we can focus on. And of course, I will be mentioning books like that do talk about more interesting women in Greek mythology. But that's my opinion on Cersei. If you want me to talk about this book more, I totally can, because I really went in depth with Song of Achilles, but for right now, this is the books that I've read by Madeline Miller. I've also read Galatea, which is a short story that she wrote. I'll just go into that briefly. So Galatea is, I believe she was a statue made by Pygmalion, and Pygmalion made this woman out of clay and stone or whatever, and he fell in love with her, and he was like, oh my gosh, she's as beautiful as Aphrodite. And usually Aphrodite is not okay if you say that. If you say someone is as beautiful or more beautiful than Aphrodite, she will usually smite that person, or more likely the woman. But in this case, I guess she thinks it's interesting or funny, maybe. I think she's making fun of Pygmalion in my interpretation of the myth, where she makes the woman real, and they go off and have a good time. But the short story Galatea is more about Galatea living her life as a woman who came to life recently, and her husband is more interested in her as a statue than a living, breathing person, which I think is very topical and very interesting. It's only about, I think, 20-30 pages, so if you just want a quick read, recommend that. It really was interesting. But as I said before, I believe that there are more interesting women in Greek mythology, and we will be getting into that right now with the next book. And now the next book I'm talking about, this is still in the contemporary or modern adaptation of Greek mythology, but I have Daughters of Sparta by Claire Haywood, and this has my favorite woman in Greek mythology. This has Clytemnestra in it. I believe this is Clytemnestra and this is Helen because Helen had red hair. Anyway, Clytemnestra is the twin sister of Helen, but of the mortal side. So Helen was born of Zeus as a swan, so she was hatched from an egg. So was Clytemnestra, but she has the mortal genes from her actual father. Anyway, Clytemnestra is my number one woman. I love her so much. I think she's really cool. And the reason why I like her is I will get into that with our classics a little bit, but she's just a cool woman. This kind of goes into the two stories of Helen and Clytemnestra. I believe the first half is them in childhood where they're sisters. They love each other, they get into fights, they're protecting each other. They see the good in each other even when maybe there's not that much good in them. And then the second half goes into like their adulthoods where Helen is in Troy. In this one, they make it so that she was more tricked into going into Troy instead of going willingly, which is an adaptation. It's interesting. I usually prefer the ones where she knowingly goes and she knowingly cheats on her husband. And during the course of the Trojan War, Clytemnestra is at home with her surviving children. And I say surviving children because actually her husband, right before going to war, sends a little messenger home and is like, oh, our oldest daughter, Iphigenia, she should be ready to get married now. And Clytemnestra's kind of like, aren't we starting a war? Can't this wait till after the war? Like this is kind of weird. I don't feel comfortable sending off my daughter to go get married and then have to just come back and be married, but also a child. But for some reason, Agamemnon is really insistent that Iphigenia must marry Achilles. And this is supposed to be like honoring the gods and making a good start to the Trojan War where basically everyone can be happy and everyone can think about happy things while they're going off to war. So Clytemnestra agrees, and she's like, okay, let's go, Iphigenia, you're gonna marry this man, and you might be a little young, but when he comes back from war, you will be revered as this man's wife, and you will probably be a queen or a princess or something. So that's great. In all actuality, that is a trick, that is a lie. Agamemnon's men had killed a sacred deer to Artemis, the one of the virgin goddesses of the hunt, and she was not happy about that whatsoever. So she said, you killed one of my sacred deer, so I get to have one of your daughters. And the daughter has to be a virgin because Artemis was very into virginity. But as a side note, in ancient Greek, the translation for virgin usually meant unmarried. So as long as you weren't married, you could still potentially have sex, but usually virgin, unmarried, also like untouched or pure in that sense. But I digress. Iphigenia comes to the wedding, the wedding, and she is led to the altar, and instead of being greeted by her betrothed or Achilles is nowhere to be found. Actually, apparently Achilles had no idea this was going on and is actually really mad that Agamemnon used his name to bring his daughter there. So that's another reason why him and Agamemnon do not get along, because he's just like, you tricked your daughter to come here because of me? She thought she was going to be marrying me? That's some shady shit right there. Anyway, instead of seeing Achilles or seeing really anyone in a bridal party, she sees her father standing there and she's just like, oh, hey dad, how's it going? And her dad just kind of grabs her, binds her mouth together so she can't curse them because he is going to slit her throat. And she knows that. And she's begging to be left alive, and he just is he's just letting these fall on deaf ears. And I actually forgot to mention, not only was Artemis like, I need your daughter, she also went to the wind god and said, like, don't let these people leave this island. They are stuck here until I get what I want. So they cannot sail away. They can't leave the island, and they kind of need to do that to get to war. So Agamemnon really doesn't have a choice, but at the same time, he's just like, all right, I guess I'll kill her, like, whatever. I have other daughters, but whatever. So Iphigenia's throat is slit, and Clytemnestra sees this all happening, and she was tricked as well. She had no idea this was going to happen, and something breaks inside of her, which, of course, she saw her daughter, who, in this book, it's always mentioned that Iphigenia and her really had a tight bond, I guess, like, firstborn. She was just like a little angel to her, and growing up, they were always very close, and so seeing her favorite daughter being killed right in front of her really got to her, which, no shit, right? And basically, well, Helen's off at Troy, just trying to fit in, but also being known as a whore, basically. Clytemnestra is at home planning the death of her husband. She, from the moment she gets home, she's just like, I'm going to kill him when he gets home. When he sets foot into this house, I'm going to kill him. And she plans that for the next 10 years the Trojan War is going on, and she ends up doing just that. She does kill him. And this kind of brings upon furies onto her house because she killed her husband, but at the same time, she's like, I feel like I'm fully justified because he killed his daughter, his own blood, and I just killed a husband. Which is really interesting to, like, think about, like, reading about that very complex woman from 4,000 years ago. I don't know, that's just, it's fascinating to me, just knowing that women could be that complex. And this isn't, like, pulled out of Claire Haywood's, like, butt. Like, this is based off of mythology, where this was written back then, where these women were that complex. They were on pretty much the same station as men in terms of how the war went off because of them. They were like the cause of it. They were the start of it. Without them, the war would not have happened. Point blank, period. That is the truth. Without these women, the Trojan War would not have happened, and the myths that we know of today would not have ever occurred. So anyway, yeah, this was fantastic. I've read Claire Haywood's other books. I've read The Shadow of Perseus. She's written other ones, and I probably have read them, can't remember at this time, but highly recommend this one. I really love it, and like I said, Clytemnestra is one of my favorite women in Greek mythology, and she will come up again, just to let you know. So now I will go on to a bit of the more classics. There's two that I want to talk about now, and I think I will talk about the other ones in another video just because this one's getting quite long. I tend to blather on about books when I get really excited, and of course, since these are my favorites, I'm going to be talking a lot. So anyway, we have here the Iliad. I have talked about this previously when I was talking about Daughters of Sparta and Song of Achilles. Those are great supplementary materials. Would I say that you have to read the Iliad first before you read books like Song of Achilles or Daughters of Sparta? Yes and no. Yes, if you really want those details and that poetry that comes with the Iliad, I would definitely recommend reading it first. But if you're just looking for really the bare bones of the Trojan War and just kind of like reading a story, I would stick with the contemporary novels. But me personally, I love the Iliad. This one here is translated by Ennis Rees, and I am actually, the next book that I'm gonna buy, I think is gonna be the Emily Wilson translation, and I will talk about her in a second because she did the Odyssey translation that I love. I feel like she's fantastic. She was the first woman actually to translate the Odyssey into English, so she does kind of her own little flair, a little bit more feminism, a little bit more talking about the women of Greek mythology and giving them a little bit more character, which I feel like sometimes the men who translate these are kind of missing. They really focus on more of the violence and the brutality of war, where, I don't know, I prefer learning about the people and how it affects them, like psychologically, which I feel like Emily Wilson really does really well. Anyway, I've read this twice now, and like I said, I will be reading the Emily Wilson translation just because I feel like she does a really great job with giving me what I want in a epic poem. But like I've said previously, this is just the epic poem written by Homer about the Trojan War, and the story is told, I think, in 15 books or 14 books. Oh no, I'm so wrong. It's like 20 books. So yeah, there's 24 books in the Iliad, and it really is great. I do love this. It's definitely not a sit down and read in a couple days. You do have to take your time with this, especially with footnotes and looking at definitions of things. I think that really helps just getting some supplementary materials while reading this book. I know that can be really annoying to some people, like reading footnotes, and I agree they can be a little annoying, but they are so necessary. I'm being so for real. They are so necessary to get through this with the knowledge that it deserves, with the fine reading that it deserves. This is honestly one of my favorite books, and I come back to it pretty often. I just read it again over the summer, and I don't know, just makes me feel really good when I read this. I love the Trojan War. I love the people in the Trojan War, especially the women. They are just so tragic, but also so strong, in my opinion, which I will be talking about that in another video, because the women of the Trojan War hit me so hard and they stick with me for so long that, like, I cannot sing their praises enough. I really can't. I love them. They are fascinating, and the stories are just beautiful that comes out of the Trojan War, even with all the brutality and the rage and the blood and the guts, which I will warn you, this book does get pretty graphic in things. Sexual assault in this, slavery, wicked violence that is definitely described in detail. I won't mention too much of that now, but as an epic poem, as a piece of mythological history, I totally recommend this. I think it is really necessary for really everyone to at least read once in their lifetime, just to at least understand, I guess, history and warfare from that time. That's my opinion. If you have read it, let me know, because I think it's great. So next we're talking about Homer's other work, which is the Odyssey. This is also an epic poem, and in this one we focus on Odysseus, king of Ithaca, who was one of the generals in the Iliad, where he is trying to get home to his wife and to his child Telemachus. And that his whole journey is just fraught with trouble and storms and gods coming after him, and he's angered the gods many times. He is known for his brains, so he's got a big mouth, and that mouth gets him in a lot of trouble because he can trick people fairly easily, and he does a really good job at it, which, you know, pisses off a lot of people because they don't like that. This is, like I said before, this is the Emily Wilson translation. I think she did a great job. I will be reading this again. I've already read it twice, but I will be reading this a third time because I just can't get enough. And a little shout out, if you are not listening or keeping up with Epic the Musical, like, what are you doing? Because it is fantastic. It really goes into Odysseus' character really well, and maybe I'll talk more about that in depth, like the connections. But for right now, I'm just talking about this one, and I really love, and I also love Penelope. I think Penelope is really great as a complement to Odysseus, because she, like Odysseus, she is smart. She doesn't really hit problems head on. She kind of like snakes her way through a solution, even if she really plays the long game, which is what Odysseus is also known for. He is also known for playing the long game, and she is a strong and smart woman. And like I've said before, I mean, I'm talking about books from like the 1700s, 1600s. We don't get complex, smart, beautiful, intelligent women. But books from even farther along before, from farther in the past, we have women who could honestly do well today. And I just, like, that makes me think a lot what happened where women got hit with such a bad stick in literature where, like, their only job is to either die or get married in a book. I will be talking about that when I talk about some of my other favorite books, because in those books, that does happen. They either die or they have to get married, which is like, what are we doing? So yeah, in conclusion, those were my 5 favorite books about mythology so far. We started off with contemporary and then we're ending with the classics. As I said before, this is my first video ever on YouTube. I will be working to make this a better experience for everyone involved going on. As always, I will be talking about books. I will be talking about writing. I will be talking about literature and things in general, maybe going into deep dives with other novels. So if that is something interesting to you, it's interesting to me, and if you thought this video was fun and you might enjoy more from me, please hit the subscribe button down below, and thank you, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!